Good afternoon and welcome to the session. I'm Neal, Karen and Natasa. Bit fraudulent for me starting to introduce this session since I have done the least amount of work, either for the presentation or indeed the project itself that we're involved with, but nevertheless I agreed to kick it off. And I'd like to just outline briefly what we're going to look about. I'm going to start by talking about blended learning, since that's what the focus of our research is, our current research, which we're carrying out under the auspices of a learning development project, one of the projects funded by the Learning Development Centre. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the background both to the curriculum and the development project that we are involving in order to research how effective it has been. So then Karen is going to report back on the preliminary findings. We've got such a lot of data that we've collected through various focus groups and so on that we're still in the process of that evaluation. And then we're going to conclude, do come in, by looking at some of the challenges which have emerged from our evaluation of a blended learning curriculum and what the implications of that are for future curriculum redesigns, both within the School of Health, which is where the three of us are working on this project, but to see how generalisable those conclusions are more widely across the institution. And then something which we've happened upon. Do come in, gentlemen. In the course of our work is a tool which has been developed in Perovic College called Blend, which is a tool that has been produced specifically to facilitate the production of a blended learning curriculum or a blended learning module. And so, assuming we've got sufficient time, then we want to demonstrate that tool very briefly and encourage you to contact us if you're interested in using it in some kind of module or curriculum or program redesign yourselves. Okay, so there's going to be an opportunity to see the tool and to find out a little bit about what it does. So the context overall then is about blended learning, and there are there's a wide variety of interpretations of what blended learning means. And indeed, one of my core texts on this by John Pegler called Preparing for Blended E-Learning, there are 14 different definitions of blended learning. So blended learning, a phrase that we all use and bandy about without any real kind of focus or clear definition. So I just thought it might be useful as prefatory comments to talk a little bit about what we understand blended learning to be. And the first of these then is it's an approach which combines learning undertaken in face-to-face sessions with online. And so I think this is quite a common use of the term, and it's something which we hear more and more about over the last few months, particularly here at City, in the context of a flipped classroom. All right, so the flipped classroom would be a kind of subset of this approach or this definition of blended learning, where you're integrating the face-to-face delivery with online work. And how that balance works and how the two elements are integrated is a challenge that we're all facing in instructional design at the moment. So a second definition is that it's a combination of technologies. So using a wide range of different technologies. It could be lecture capture, it could be using the classroom clickers or Poll Anywhere, which I know some of you have already used today, and just using whiteboards. Chalk is a technology, it's a learning technology. So it's about using a range of different technologies and also a combination of methodologies. So blended learning could include having some transmissive instruction, which is basically where a lecturer is transmitting content into the ears and minds, the active minds hopefully of the students, but also some constructivist approaches where you're involving students, as we hope to involve you later today, in some activity and peer-to-peer learning to help you to construct your own learning. So blended learning as a phrase then is an umbrella term which embraces these many different types of blend, okay? And as I say, in one of the classic texts on this, there are at least 14 different definitions, so I've just chosen here to focus on 3 of them. So might have an opportunity at the end then to come back and talk a little bit more about what blended learning means in your own context. But now I want to turn your attention to what we have done in relation to this in the nursing curriculum. So you'll be aware of the fact that the School of Health has a large cohort, in fact 2 cohorts a year, sometimes 3, of undergraduate nurses. And a couple of years ago, the opportunity arose to redesign that nursing curriculum, the undergraduate nursing curriculum, but also the postgraduate diploma in nursing as well. And this arose under the periodic review process, but also I think I'm right in saying it was partly required by the Nursing Midwifery Council, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it was. So both the regulatory body, the NMC, Nursing Midwifery Council, and the periodic review required the course to be redeveloped. And so I mention that because I think when that periodic review comes up, it's an ideal opportunity to kind of step back and think about redesign of how the curriculum is delivered. And indeed, we had a development day last week in the School of Engineering that I attended, which provided an opportunity for this kind of major rethink about how you design and deliver a curriculum. So anyway, back to the nursing curriculum. A great opportunity then to establish a new curriculum on the core philosophy of relationship-centred care. And that was the unifying principle that we wanted to implement across all modules and to see that embedded in the core of the new curriculum. And there were various demands that we were aware of when the process began. We knew, because of various restructuring that had already gone on in the School of Health, that there was going to be significant reduction in the number of academic staff available to deliver whatever new curriculum we came up with. So that already puts a kind of a significant challenge in front of the curriculum design team. And we also knew that from feedback that had come through the various annual programme evaluations and so on, that students were already demanding more flexible learning opportunities. So, taking these external factors on board meant that we needed to come up with an imaginative, blended solution to the design. And Karen was the person who led it through thick and thin. There's a process that I think took, about 15 months altogether? Yeah. And regular meetings, so I can't emphasise enough how important that was to have regular meetings which were minuted, the minutes were circulated, which involved all the module teams as well as the programme team, and significantly involved also the learning technologists from the school, represented here by Natasa, and my role, which was a kind of advisory role, as the school liaison academic, working with the nursing curriculum redesign team about things like mapping assessments across the whole programme, about coming up with innovative forms of assessment, about making sure that assessments align with each other, and also particularly I think around implementing the use of technologies in the delivery of the curriculum, particularly technologies that had been researched by Natasa and the technology enhanced learning group within the school on the use of open educational resources and reusable learning objects. So this was, collecting together a large pool of resources, which then people on each module from the various module teams could appropriate and deploy in their modules as appropriate. So that was kind of one of the strands of development that we had going on as the curriculum took shape. So we produced the new curriculum, and it's being delivered first from September of 2012. And we're in the process of going through it, the first iteration now. And what we've done is to take advantage of the generosity of the Learning Development Centre, I have to say that, as a fully paid up member, in order to fund a project to evaluate what the students think of it. Because it's one thing for us to kind of sit in our garrets and come up with a scheme which we think is going to meet student needs, but I think the really important aspect of this is to carry out evaluation, and that's really what we want to focus on today, is to report back to you the preliminary findings of that. So now I'm going to hand you over to Karen, who's been leading on that particular aspect. Karen.
Okay. Thank you, Neal, for setting the context. So we've got the new curriculum which started last September, and Neal's already said that part of the core philosophy of the new curriculum is that it's based on relationship-centred care, and that is about engaging both service users of the nursing service, but also engaging students in the development of the curriculum and the implementation of the curriculum. So we felt that we needed to be doing an evaluation as we went along to see how we were doing. So the best way we felt to continue with the philosophy of relationship-centred care was to ask the students and the academic staff who had engaged in the curriculum. So we decided that we would use focus groups, and we did 2 focus groups with academics and 5 focus groups with students. We focused on the postgraduate diploma, as that was the part of the programme that I was most involved in, but also smaller number of students, and they fast-tracked through the programme, so we thought we could use their feedback for the BSc part of the programme as well. So we carried out these focus groups earlier this year. They were audio recorded and transcribed, and we're in the middle of a thematic analysis. We've been using NVivo as our tool to help us to do that. So that's been a learning experience for us as well, using that. But it's been quite useful to help us when we change our minds about the way we're coding. It's quite a nice way of using technology there to help us. So the actual themes that we've come up with are preliminary themes. We have changed them several times, and I'm sure there will be a different iteration when we've completed our analysis. But at the moment, there are these 7 different areas that have come up as the main points that both academics and students have discussed and fed back on. So we'll take you through those one by one. On the right, or on your left as you're looking at it, these are the codes that have come up from that we've used in NVivo when we've been analysing. And learning and teaching is obviously something that has come up as very important to evaluate, and there's quite a few different areas, and I'm only going to be able to talk about a few of them. I could stand up here for hours talking about each one of these codes, but we'll sort of do the edited highlights. Something that came up a lot with the students was the issue of assessment. And one of the things that they found with the blended approach was that they were doing a lot of work, and they didn't feel it was all assessed. And we were quite surprised to find at the end that the student said, we really wanted a biology exam and you didn't give us one, which is quite surprising for me, but a lot of students said that. They did like the idea that we had set them assessment tasks during the first modules that built up to their summative assessment. So the summative assessment in the first theoretical module was a patchwork text, and they had to do work together, do presentations, and then patch those together for their final essay. And they really liked the idea that they got feedback as they went along. So although they weren't familiar with the type of assessment, they liked the idea that they were getting sort of feed forward towards their assessment. They came up with quite a lot of suggestions for change or improvement, as did the academics, and I won't talk too much about those because I think Natasa will talk about a lot of those when we come to Moodle. But I think one of the main things that they talked about was making clear expectations. So what were they supposed to do with all of this online learning? I'm not sure we signposted it as well as we could do. And one of the big things that came up about guided independent study was the students wanted to know really clearly why the guided independent study had been set. What was the point of them doing it? They didn't like the idea that they were doing a lot of studying, but they weren't either getting feedback on it, or they didn't quite know how it fitted into the whole. So again, that's the idea of signposting. You can't just throw a load of workbooks at them and expect them to know what to do with them. And that came out quite a lot. And you'll see from that quote there, one of the students said that they didn't make as much use of that as they could have done because they weren't quite sure what the expectation was. Now, obviously nursing is a very practice discipline, and the students really enjoyed anything where they could see the application to practice. And one of the things that they talked about was they liked the idea where there were lead lectures where they knew the presentations would be put up beforehand, they could do reading around that, and that when they came into the classroom that the academics weren't so much just reading out the slides but actually giving real life examples and demonstrating the application to practice. And they also liked the use of videos, and we have something called Clinical Skills Online, which is basically a how to do nursing clinical skills, that they all used those before they came into practical sessions, so they quite liked that blend. The academics, when they were talking about learning and teaching, were very much talking about sharing practice and adopting good practice. We tried quite hard to come up with some guidelines for what people should be doing in each module, but nobody, as one of the academics said, nobody policed that, and they got very upset when people would upload things onto their Moodle module when it didn't fit in with their plan, and it also confused the students. So this idea of coming up with a way of using your blend and having some form of consistency came out highly from both the academic staff and from the students. The social aspect links very much to technology, and I'm going to let Natasa talk about that. But one interesting thing that did come out of the learning and teaching was we set up lots of discussion boards, and that's so that students didn't have to come into university, but they came in on days they didn't have to come in because they liked that face-to-face interaction. So even if they weren't having face-to-face interactions with the academics, they came in and worked together anyway. So that was the learning and teaching. Again, the evaluation, there was a lot of positive and negative evaluations, and most of these we'll talk about in other sections. But I think that the overall idea of the evaluation of blended learning was the students and the staff liked this idea that you come to a session, a face-to-face session, prepared to ask questions and to engage, rather than just coming along to be taught something. The student quote there, you come to a session with questions rather than going away and leaving with questions, seemed to be something that a lot of students valued. Yeah.
Moodle. Okay, I'll take over here. These are the areas that were identified and coded many times to do with Moodle. It's not just with Moodle. When you look at familiarity, there were some students who were not familiar, there were some that were familiar, academics and so on, that varied. But structure, when we are talking about structure here, we are not talking just about Moodle structure, we are talking about blended learning. How do you structure your learning? We are talking about instructional design. It's just that Moodle is a kind of control panel from which you are doing it. And in that way, we had to code it under the Moodle, although it's actually structure of blended learning as well as the signposting, because this signposting relates to assessment as well as the guided independent study or any other teaching and learning activities. But it comes up under Moodle because you are directing your work from Moodle, and it depends a lot on flexibility of Moodle and adaptability. So structure is something where we have almost the largest number of comments on, and this is something that kept coming again and again. And this is from both sides, from students and from academics, because we do find out that both of them were sometimes struggling to find their way around in the way that modules are structured or in the way that Moodle is structured, and it doesn't allow to do particular things in particular ways, so people have to find the ways around it, and they may do it differently depending on their topic, depending on their background, so the structure would differ. Signposting is another one with so many coding references. And this is again, as we mentioned in the assignment, but very simple ones. For example, if everybody agreed and sat on the program level and said, okay, we will all put in our Moodle module, this is absolutely necessary for the session, this is for after the session, and here is your assessment or self-assessment. This is something that was not clearly defined on every single module, and it's not something that would require a lot of time, but it would just require people to sit and agree on these things. There was a lot about consistency as well, to start with terminology, for example. Again, simple one. If people just sat and agreed, okay, we will use this term for assessment of, or we had people working in practice. Sometimes it's placement, sometimes it's practice, sometimes... If people use the same one and put it in the same area in relation to the module structure, it would be easier for students to find the resources that they were after. So I probably can't stay too long on this, but the people liked it. Actually, students and academics like Moodle, and one of them said it's like a one-stop shop. We didn't take that quote, we took this one, but it's... Technology. There were other technologies that students used. There are some examples here, and these are the ways that people use them. We will have many more when we finish. But people are using technologies, and interesting thing was where they had forums provided on their module to discuss topics. They would go off on Facebook and put their group there because it allowed them to share the resources easier to their friends. And they would put videos there, they would have discussions, and they would not want to go back to the forums. And they said they're not flexible enough, this is more user-friendly, I check Facebook every day a few times, and if some new resources has been posted on Moodle, one of us would find it and put a link to it on Facebook, so we all were updated straight away. Some were using Twitter, and we will have more findings on that too. And this was interesting. So when they found environment that we provided inflexible, they went out and found something that was suitable for them. Some universities have plugins for these social networking tools, and they actually can feed into the Moodle. I don't think we agreed this year to have those plugged in, but there is something we may want to consider in future if students are using it. Resources. Okay, this is another one, which is, these are the topics that we identified and things that were mentioned. Well, you see that students suffered finding this computer. This is not a typical, but there is representation of students who are struggling with this. And there's another thing that we identified during this talks to academics and students. When we say availability, academics are very worried about quality of the interactivity of their resource. Are the videos very good? Are they high definition? Are they well presented? Are they well structured? Was it scripted well? While very often problem we experience are something to do with the network, with the Wi-Fi, technology not working, or updating of the browsers on the student and academic machines. This is something that does not happen regularly and in the way that is required, because one week you could teach in one room and everything would work, and the following week, if browsers have been updated but not everything, not all the add-ons are there, it will not work. And this is something we really need to think about and to sort within the university, because these are simple issues that cause really big problems. And this is something that can be sorted out very easily. So we can have all the lovely resources. If we cannot access them, there is a problem. So we're talking about availability, accessibility, relevance type and so on, and evaluation of those resources. It was very often important to people, the ownership of these resources. So people were using others or their own. And timetabling was mentioning a lot. If timetable was well integrated with it, it would be much easier for students to identify where they are in the course. So I'll move on.
Two issues that came up, well, one issue that came up for academics and students was the time demand of a blended approach to learning. There seems to be a sort of assumption that if there are less face-to-face hours, that then that's less academic time, when in fact developing the resources, moderating discussion boards, ensuring everything's up to date, making sure your links are working, etc., can take an inordinate amount of time, and that is not always recognised or acknowledged within the schools. And it's something that we certainly struggled with. And a lot of the academics said, you know, we were always just one step ahead of the students. This took a lot longer than we thought it would. It's not just throwing things at Moodle. You really have to think it through. And if you do things where you're trying to ensure constructive alignment, that all your learning outcomes are met, your assessments are assessing the learning outcomes, and you want to make sure that all the resources are there, it does take an awful lot of time. But there may only be 20 hours at all on, you know, face-to-face time. And especially if you're using this idea, as Neal said, of the flipped classroom, where you want to get the students well prepared before they come into the face-to-face sessions, that's a whole lot of work that the students have also got to do. And the students said, you know, sometimes there was just so much work, especially when they were trying to find their way around Moodle and they weren't sure which things were essential and which weren't. They found the time demands were quite extreme as well. There's also an issue around knowledge and skills. It's usually prior knowledge and skills. And some of the students, we made the assumption that the students would all be very techie savvy, and they weren't. Some were familiar with Moodle, some weren't. And the students that weren't found it quite difficult to navigate Moodle and find what they were looking for. Not all of our students had access to PCs at home, though most of them had some form of mobile technology. And obviously we had a lot of people that were really engaged in the curriculum development and wanted to be a big part of the implementation. There were those early adopters who were really wanting to use different types of technology. But there were also people that found it really difficult, and we had to make sure that we had a lot of support and a lot of teaching going on for the academic staff as well. So I suppose in summary, there are some principles that have come out of our preliminary findings. And the first one is both for students and for staff, is this acknowledgement and reward for the time and effort spent either developing the resources or using the resources. And so, for example, the students were saying, well, there were lots of quizzes and we could do the quizzes, but we didn't actually know whether the academics were looking to see if we'd done it or not. You know, they wanted some sort of acknowledgement, and teachers obviously wanted acknowledgement for the vast amounts of time they had spent, often in their own time and at weekends, developing resources. When on paper somebody's saying to you, well, you haven't actually done your teaching hours for this month, when they'd been putting in loads more time. I can see lots of nods around the room, so I think that's something that a lot of people would agree with. The idea of clearer signposting and guidance, again, that's both for staff and for academics. I think Natasa's idea of agreeing common language, what we will and won't put on Moodle, how we'll structure it. Students sometimes say, well, there's death by PowerPoint, but on Moodle they say there's death by scrolling through screeds of presentations, etc. One of the things they quite liked was when we changed the structure and actually did a week-by-week structure, so they knew exactly what they'd got to do week by week. They found that quite helpful. And also the guidance, exactly what have I got to do, what's necessary, what can I do if I feel like it, what do I need to do before a session. They came up with this idea of a traffic light system, so they knew what had to be done and what they could safely leave out. And the staff also wanted more guidance on how to best use Moodle. And some staff needed help with use of the technology as well. This idea of the consistency of language and agreed standards really needs to be at a programme level, because what the students were saying is they just learned the way to do to navigate around one Moodle module, and then they'd move on to the next one, and the next academic had done it completely different, and they didn't find that helpful at all. Seems fairly obvious now, but it was something that we tried to get general standards for, but that obviously didn't always happen. I think this idea of resources, again, Natasa's already talked about this. It's all very well us having the individual resources, but if we don't have enough computers, if we don't have access to some of the technologies we might want to, we just came up with an example of, if you want to upload a program to your own PC, you can't even do that. You have to get somebody else to come and do it because we don't have administrative rights. It's all very frustrating. So I think Neal's now going to talk about just some examples that we've come up with.
Karen's already mentioned one of the small stakes assessments using patchwork text, which builds towards a final summative assessment. And I think one of the things that we found both designing this curriculum, but also more widely in the work that I do across the university, having cumulative small stakes assessments early on in a module has several benefits. It engages students, it reduces dropout rate, especially if you start with things that are relatively low level and can build student confidence, so you're not setting the barrier too high to start with. But I think crucially also, it helps with that kind of feed-forward process, which all too often doesn't happen where modules only have an end-loaded assessment. So, students can complete a module, they do the assessment on that, they don't even see the feedback because it might be in the form of a summative exam, and they move on without knowing what they've learned or what they haven't learned. So I think by introducing this kind of small stakes assessment through the module, it engages students, it keeps them involved in the work, in time on task, and we know from last year's plenary speaker at this conference, Graham Gibbs, that paradoxically, students are happier when they're working harder. That's a horrible truth. I'll challenge you to go and share with your students next time you're with them and see how they respond to that, but that does seem to be the case. And so building feed forward in, I think, is critical to student progression and student learning. And that can be done by filtering in these small stakes assessments in the online environment where students can self-check. I've attended a number of the focus groups that Karen and Natasa have carried out with students, and something that particularly struck me and why I wanted it to go onto this slide is because I was really impressed with the students' enthusiasm for having resources in a variety of media, so that they could, for example, listen to a lecture while they were preparing the tea for the family, or while they were on their way into the university, or before they went to sleep at night. Perhaps they were insomniac and it would help them to get through. I don't know. But so we've got these various things, podcasts, lecture capture, which, as you probably know, is going to be much more available in the next academic year. Or using the Adobe Presenter type thing, which is where you have an audio narration over a PowerPoint presentation. So these are popular with the students, and they use them and find them, helpful ways of absorbing information, which really liberates the classroom type, and for getting away from that instructivist, transmissive approach, which really brings me on to this concluding point about how you can then use the face-to-face time that you have to provoke and probe and question students' assumptions, understanding, and get them to collaborate together in the classroom situation. I know this is more difficult to achieve where you might have a lecture of 3 hours duration to a couple of hundred students. That's a separate issue which we could address on another occasion. But by and large, I think the whole thrust of what we are working at with this curriculum is to change the balance between the online and the face-to-face, and to really think more now about how we transform our use of face-to-face time, the precious face-to-face time, which we know students find incredibly valuable, to facilitate their learning from each other as much as they are learning from their academic lead. So those are some of the things that have come out of the preliminary analysis that we've done on the focus groups. And so now we'd like to move on to see whether you think this tool, which we've, as I say, acquired from Imperial, might help you to meet the...
Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question.
Yeah.
What approximate percentage did you move from face-to-face to online? What's your balance now?
For a 15 credit module where we have 150 hours of student effort, there is approximately, depends on the credit worthiness of the module, there's approximately 20 hours of face-to-face and 130.
So what
was it before, sorry, in terms of the shift?
We had about double the face-to-face before.
Yeah.
It's quite a significant shift. And with a clinical, with a clinically based module, it's quite a significant shift.
And did you only work with internal resources and people to help you put it online, or were you working with any external providers that really put training online and deliver training online? It's all in-house?
It's not all in-house. There has been some work with external providers, but we have used a lot of open source materials.
Okay, so this is a tool 3 of us came across at the end of last year, and this year we started a collaborative project with Imperial College London because they produced this tool. And it says there it's instructional framework. It uses learning outcomes, Bloom's taxonomy, and it suggests activities that would be easy to develop online, and divides activities that require instructionist or constructivist approach, depending on the skill that is required and the learning outcome. So we tried it in our school on several modules, and people found it useful in a few ways. One is if people don't know where to start and they want to make their module more interactive, because sometimes I meet academics saying, oh, I need to do more blended, I don't know where to start, I need to see you. And when they have time, they do. So it's a good starting point. It's also good if you have developed your activities, but you want to refine them or you want to change them for something else that is also suitable. So if you had a case study, you want to see whether, oh, I would like to see whether video would be useful for that, because I found video. And also it acted as very good discussion trigger on a program level, where people would look at the tool, then they would start talking and looking into learning outcomes and refining their learning outcomes, because at that point they would say, actually, I'm not sure about my learning outcomes, maybe I need to refine them a bit more, because we have we have verbs for each of the learning outcomes in this tool. I will show you the tool. I'll just minimize this. I logged in the background, so I will start here. So it's a very simple tool. So I will call it Learning City, name of the academic, I'll put myself, and I'll select 3 learning outcomes so I don't have to spend too much time. They also calculated the number of students in order to devise activities that can be used. So these are numbers of students that we can choose from. They decided not to have, well, they have more than 20 there, but I'll say, okay, I'll say 5 to 20 or 5 to 10, and I'll go next. Now, I will have to select a verb that reflects my learning outcome, and this is how they're divided here. These are the ones that we are offered. So, for psychomotor, and then we have cognitive, and we have functional, procedural, conceptual, metacognitive, and attitude. With Maria, who developed this tool in Imperial College, she told me they use this tool to map whole learning curriculum for the new medical school in Singapore. And she said sometimes she would work with academics and they would have something like explain, but actually when they would go into the detail, the student was not asked to explain but to label. It was a lower level skill, so it did help people to define the learning outcomes. So I'll say define, and I'll go for the next one. I'm coming up here with learning outcomes. If you have one that you can think of in your module, please give it to me so I can use it. Plan is good. There's plan. And the one classify. Yeah. Sorry.
What is learning technologies? What does it mean?
Okay. Or learning outcomes. Okay. And then I do next, and I have some graph which tells me what kind of blend this would be. I'll show you what they are. It's just a sentence. So blend 1 is nearly perfect match between instructionist and constructivist activities, and you could choose either of these to deliver. Blended 2, high number, suited for face-to-face, and blended 3, this is just using your learning outcomes. And here we will have options. So this one is only instructionist. So I have to introduce this topic to my students. I can use either timeline. Here they use set of activities that they developed in Imperial. We have equivalents to them here, or to most of them. You may not be familiar with terms here, but say I will have case scenarios. Oh, demonstration, I'm demonstrating this here. And I can test knowledge using any of these. Multiple responses is recommended, but I could use any of these other assessment activities. How to organize your module? Case studies are recommended here on the basis of plan, but I could use any other role play, video gaming, or so on. When I worked with one academic in mental health, she looked at this and it was a case study. I said, oh, I already am using case study, but so she selected case study. I said, I didn't put any self-assessment for them. Good, I will start one in Moodle now. So we actually went and started a quiz for her in Moodle so she could have activity to go with this. On the other side, for collaborative approach, they would need to do their reading and studying, and then they could discuss and do collaborative work, either in team-based learning, in forums, or problem-based, or within seminars, or so on. So I will have, so from here you can export it into Word or print it out. So I will export it and move back so we can continue with the end. It's a very simple tool, and if you are interested in trying it for yourself, please let us know. We'll be happy to come and work with you and your program to see, to show you how it works. And this is the slide I have to rush up. We are getting late.
Yeah, we don't really have a lot of time left for this now, but just to reiterate what Natasha has said, that if you're interested in following up with the blend tool, then call on us and we can come along as a kind of hit squad to help you identify learning needs. And I don't think it's a kind of tool that you can really use on its own. I think probably, having that discussion with somebody from the LDC or your educational developer, technologist, whatever they're called this week, would be a helpful thing to do.
Sorry, what comes out of the end? A list of
Well,
activities?
a list comes out.
Activities.
It's a list of activities that are recommended and how you structure the module, and those which are aligned for practical skills, the acquisition of practical skills or metacognitive, so on that Bloom's taxonomy scale. All right. So we're going to ask you to answer these questions really: how to improve the blend activity on your own programs. So what are the ingredients that you want? And you might think about using the blend tool to get you started on that process. And in particular, something that I'm interested in is the implications for curriculum design and assessment. So I think one of the really important points that's come out of this study so far is the need for consistency across a program. Right? So what we're finding from student feedback especially is that where you have some modules within a program that are really well thought through, have a good integration between the online and the face-to-face, students like that. But if they go to another one, which, to use a phrase that's already been bandied around today, it's just a scroll of death of 120 PDFs and PowerPoint presentations that students have got to go through, students become very unhappy very quickly at the inconsistency. So it's about supporting staff to work at a program level and to achieve that level of consistency. And on that point, I can only underscore what has already been said by Karen, namely the need for academics to campaign to have this work recognised. Because we can't be expected to move towards a more blended delivery, a more flexible, self-directed study on behalf of students, unless staff are being paid. The time that they're putting into this is acknowledged as part of their working week. So I'm really keen that you go back to your constituencies and campaign for that transformation if you can. Certainly something that we're really pressing for in the School of Health, and I'd like to think it's going to happen more widely. Unfortunately we don't have the time to discuss these things, but thinking about what's in your blend and how you balance the interaction between face-to-face and online. If you'd like us to come along and talk to you about it, we're not wholly school bound, so just please do call on us if you want to. We'll be happy to take any questions about anything that we've said so far. I did bring the post-it notes, but
Ran out of time.
So just another question about that tool.
Yes.
Are they developing that as a commercial piece of software? Is that what they're doing?
They developed it in a school and they used it in their school. And they mapped the curriculum with it. We got it this year. We signed a contract with them that we will use it, we will trial it, and we'll share the data with them. And we'll also publish our findings. We got it for free in exchange for this. Otherwise, it would cost about £8,500 a year. So this contract is for 1 year, but if we want to keep it, we can extend the contract for the next year. And we may do some collaborative improvement on the tool, because, for example, it is more suited for level 6 than for level 7. So you have to struggle to find equivalent learning outcomes on level 7. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. It's more suited for level 6. So they are very open, the person who developed it and the innovation services, they are very open to collaboration at the moment.
It's really good for expanding your repertoire and sort of giving you new twists on things. And,
Yeah.
you know, this is a different way of doing it.
Yeah, I shouldn't have shut it down. You can actually save that as Word. It doesn't save all the options that you had, but it saves your selected options, and you can save it on your computer and then add it, and you can print it out. They will work on it to be able to save on the system, but at the moment, as we are just trialing it, they would not, and we may not want to put our data onto their system, so we can't do that. So, yeah. Yes.
I just want to question about the this idea of the classroom. You mentioned about the postgraduate students in some cases. Are most of them currently working and they do part-time studies?
No, it is actually a full-time programme because they're doing a postgraduate academic course, but it's also their professional registration, so they have clinical placement. So they're,
Okay.
I mean, a lot of them do have part-time jobs.
The reason I asked about it, because I think if you just go for the idea and actually make it quite clear to them, you've got to commit that you're going to do some work before you come in and design all your in-class activities around that. And if only 50% takes it on board and actually doing not the other 50%, then you sometimes create a huge challenge for yourself during the class, and that may have even an adverse impact on the student satisfaction because you're just pitching on one side of it, not the other. I just wondered about your experience. Did you have those sort of challenges?
Most of the students did most of the work, some didn't, but in the focus groups, it came out quite clearly that they felt that they should have done and that they'd missed out on learning. In a completely different programme, one of my master's modules that I run, which is nurses working full-time, I use a similar sort of process, and I make it quite clear that you know, it says in the programme spec how many hours of student effort, and you know, I don't think most students expect to do a master's module where they just come in for 3 hours a week and that's all they have to do. And most of the students on that module like the idea that their learning is very focused and they know what's expected of them.
A couple of points I just would add on as footnotes to that. With the new iteration of Moodle that's coming out for next academic year, there's going to be conditional release or selective release so that you can say that students will only get access to the next materials if they've done this, right? So that's a bit mean, kind of, but effective.
I'm not sure about the student satisfaction about
No,
that.
hey, you know, it means that if they want to access, you know,
No, I appreciate it.
that's and the further thing is getting away from that kind of scroll of death which has been mentioned, because it's going to be much easier. I don't quite understand this, but to release things on a week-by-week basis or theme by theme, topic by topic, however it is you decide, you are going to structure your modules so that students don't get quite so disoriented by having that, you know, endless scroll to go through.
And also there will be a feed of things that were latest uploaded. There will be a feed for students on the side, a new version of Moodle, which is one of the things that came up. They will say, oh, there will be 30 documents and I didn't know which one, I know some were new, but I didn't know which ones I read, which ones I didn't. So I didn't have time to go through all 30 again to see whether I read them or not.
And also the ability to tick off what you've done.
This was another one. They said, I would have liked to have some tick box so I could see what I have done already. It gives a sense of achievement as well as clarity.
So we're not really in the business of peddling new technologies to you, but you know, those are just some of the affordances of the new Moodle that I think are going to help to deliver some of the splendid
Yes.
stuff.
Natasha, you mentioned that the students said they would like better integration with the timetable of Moodle. Do you mean they want to know, you know, from week to week what they should be studying and how long they should spend on different activities and resources?
Well,
They meant that, and they said that there was Moodle and then there was the timetabling system and the two didn't interact.
Okay.
So it was
I
both.
mean, Moodle already allows that, doesn't it? I consider them on our programme, we've got a thing, you go into the programme overview, and it's got week by week all the different classes, the pre-reading for every class, the material that will be used in each class. So
we don't have that.
is available on it can be set up. I am conscious it's just gone past 1 o'clock. We were meant to finish at 5 yes, sir. If you could please complete your evaluation forms, shall we? Can I say thank you to our colleagues for their presentation?